Elden Ring, a game that lets you explore a what seems to be endless world which provides combat that will demand skill and patience. A game that gives you the freedom to define your journey the way you want it through choices you make, various builds you create, and different paths you choose. But Elden Ring didn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of years of refining ideas across the Dark Souls trilogy and even Sekiro. In this video, I want to take a closer look at some of the features and designs that Elden Ring built on, where they first showed up, and when they did, how they changed over time. We start off with the influence on the world design of Elden Ring. While the open world and the design is truly unique and beautifully done, to get there FromSoftware went through 3 different approaches with the Dark Souls trilogy. Dark Souls 1 is famous for its interconnected map where shortcuts fold areas back into the Firelink Shrine. Dark Souls 2 took a different approach, with Majula as a hub and multiple branching paths, plus fast travel has been unlocked early, whereas Dark Souls 3 was designed in a more linear way, with branches but fewer surprises. Elden Ring blends those lessons into its open world. The lands between gives you freedom, while legacy dungeons return to the tighter, looping design of the older games. When it comes to gameplay, there are many aspects that have been improved and fine-tuned over years. One of them is the dodge roll and how iframes are influenced by your build and the equipment load. In Dark Souls 2, the number of invincibility frames on your roll wasn't fixed from the start. It depended on the skill's adaptability, which increased the agility and additionally was also influenced by the skill called attunement. While the latter had a smaller impact, adaptability was the main contributor to additional iframes. That's also why dodging feels a little bit sluggish early in DS2 until you invest into it. Elden Ring did not bring back adaptability, but the influence is there. Roll safety is tied to equip load and stamina management. This means that depending on your equipment load, it is defined if you fast, medium, or heavy roll, whereas each roll type has defined iframes connected to it. While this is simpler than in Dark Souls 2, the idea that build choices affect your dodge roll still remains, as you can move these limits by investing in points in endurance. Also, combat aspects have been fine-tuned over years in other games and brought to Elden Ring. One of the clearest examples is power stancing. This first only appeared in Dark Souls 2, where you could wield 2 compatible weapons if you met higher stat requirements that exceeded even the regular weapon stats requirements. Doing so, you unlocked a new stance with dual attacks. It was a big investment, but it opened up unique movesets. Elden Ring takes that same idea, lowered the barrier as you only need to meet the stat requirements for each weapon and not an increased threshold anymore, and makes it a core build option. So one can say that dual wielding colossal weapons or stacking bleed with 2 katanas all traces back into the system of Dark Souls 2. But power stancing was not the only combat aspect that has been introduced in the earlier series and has been improved and taken over to Elden Ring. Another mechanic is the weapon arts, or Ashes of War as they are called in Elden Ring. With Dark Souls 3, FromSoftware introduced weapon skills to each weapon. These skills are practically a special attack or a special move that cost FP to execute it. This was new to the series and not part of any other Souls game before. Elden Ring builds directly on that. It gives players Ashes of War that come with a weapon, but are also able to be applied to different weapons. So most weapons can be customized with different skills and scaling paths. A little exception from that are boss weapons that still keep up their unique skills, just like in Dark Souls 3. The fundamental difference is that in Elden Ring, the player has far more control over how their build plays, as a broad variety of Ashes of War can be applied to various weapons. Speaking of weapon skills that can be triggered for FP, Dark Souls 3 brought FP into the series. The focus points are basically a shared pool for casting spells and using weapon skills. Elden Ring keeps this system and also expands its use to summons the so-called spirit ashes that we are going to talk about later in this video. On the gear side, Elden Ring also introduced affinities, which is known as infusions that began in Dark Souls 1 and expanded in Dark Souls 2. Elden Ring kept the fundamentals of this concept as affinities, which are now tied to Ashes of War. You can push a weapon towards strength, dexterity, or elements like fire and frost, or even towards bleed and poison, while also deciding which skill the weapon carries. From offensive aspects of combat to defensive aspects. In Dark Souls, poise and stagger were always there, but they were hidden values. Dark Souls 3 added hyper armor, windows that let heavy weapons push through small hits. And then Sekiro came and shifted the focus to posture, which allowed for the first time to break your opponent's guard, which enabled you to land a death blow. I will be honest, I have not played Sekiro too much yet, but even I have seen the iconic red circle on the enemies when the posture has been broken. Elden Ring took all these ideas and merged them. Attacks, especially heavy attacks, jump attacks, and guard counters, all build stance damage, and when enough stance damage has been done and the enemy stance breaks, you get to perform a critical hit. Probably one of the most satisfying aspects of combat in Elden Ring. Moving from features that are focused on the players to features focused on others. Summoning allies has always been part of the series. In Dark Souls 1, it was already possible to summon NPCs or even other players to a boss fight. This continued through Dark Souls 2 and 3. Later, Elden Ring built up on that idea and added Spirit Ashes. Spirit Ashes are AI-controlled summons that cost FP and can be upgraded. They do not replace multiplayer summons, but they give solo players more options and make the system a core part of the game rather than a side tool. One big aspect that makes this genre so unique is, in my view, the huge variety the games offer. May it be due to leveling different stats in a different playthrough or using new weapons and or sorceries. Dark Souls 2 was the first game to also allow respec by using soul vessels at the Firekeepers in the Thing Betwixt. Dark Souls 3 shifted that role to Rosaria and the Cathedral of the Deep. In Elden Ring, the principle has been taken over by moving it to Renala, a boss that offers respecking in exchange for lava tears after you defeated her. The system works the same way. You can try out different builds without starting over or going through a new game plus. Another tradition that does not come to mind immediately for the Souls series is that every Souls game has its optional fights that become the stories players share the most. In Dark Souls 1, Manus and Calamite were the bosses that people mentioned the most to me before and during my first playthrough. When I think about my Dark Souls 2 experience, the Fume Knight is one of the bosses that I keep thinking back to. For Dark Souls 3, it is the same story. The Nameless King, another optional iconic boss that brings up many good stories. In Elden Ring, this pattern has been continued. To finish the game, you do not need to beat Millennia or Dragonlord Placidusax. Yet, both bosses are so iconic that players make them most of the time part of their playthrough, which easily gives them the role of the most optional iconic bosses of the game. To me, this tradition is as important for FromSoftware's identity as bonfires and Estus flasks. Now we talked a lot about features that Elden Ring simply took over or improved them and then implemented them into the game. But there are also features that are entirely new. The world map with custom markers or the stakes of Marika that act like checkpoints, avoiding long runbacks, or a rather complex mechanic like guard counters that reward blocking with a well-timed strike back. All these features are additions made for Elden Ring's scale and pacing. They sit on top of the older ideas rather than replacing them. So by comparing the aspects of the Dark Souls trilogy and Sekiro with Elden Ring, one thing becomes very clear. Elden Ring isn't a clean break from the trilogy. It's the sum of experiments and refinements that started in Dark Souls, grew in Dark Souls 2 and 3, and picked up lesson from Sekiro, following the principle constant improvement and not constant change. Power stancing, Ashes of War, Spirit Ashes, respecs, and the tradition of optional iconic bosses all have a history. That history is what makes Elden Ring feel both familiar and new, and is, in my view, the biggest factor of success for this game. Before we wrap it up here, I am interested in your views. Let me know down below in the comments which features do you think Elden Ring improved the most compared to the older games. As usual, thank you very much for watching, and I see you in the next one.